Today, we're going to consider the theory and mechanics of bird flight. Now, because Newton showed us that stationary objects fall to the earth, the only way to stay airborne without sinking is to use some means of propulsion to gain an amount of lift necessary to fight the effects of gravity. Now, an airplane provides propulsion with its engines and lift with its wings, but a bird's wing provides both propulsion and lift. So even though there's fundamental differences between fixed-wing aircraft and birds, we can learn some basic principles by considering theory related to fixed-wing flight. Let's talk about the idea of lift first. The bird's wing acts as an airfoil. An airfoil is an object designed to have a reaction with the air through which it passes. And there are two kinds of pressures associated with an airfoil passing through the air. There's dynamic pressure. This is the pressure exerted more or less parallel to the direction of airflow. And there's static air pressure. That would be the pressure exerted perpendicular to the direction of airflow. And these two pressures are inversely related. The faster the flow of air past an object, the lower the static pressure against the object. Now, Bernoulli was the first to formalize this relationship in this equation, where static pressure plus half rho, a constant related to the viscosity of the material through which the airfoil is moving, times velocity squared equals a constant. Well, what does that mean? What it means, as the velocity of air past an object increases, if we increase the v here, that is, the dynamic pressure, as that increases, the pressure perpendicular to the object, right, the static pressure, P, decreases. Now, this is because the whole equation equals a constant. If velocity goes up, then the only way to keep a constant value on the right side of the equation is to decrease static pressure, P. Now, this is pretty neat because the relationship can show us how an airfoil should gain lift as it passes through the air. Okay, now first off, this relationship holds only for air moving in an organized or laminar manner over a streamlined body. So you got to have kind of a streamlined object, an airfoil, before these principles really apply. Reynolds was the one who showed that slow-moving water or air, or whatever the medium is, flows in a laminar fashion against nice airfoils, but after some threshold speed can become turbulent. And so if you don't have the smooth laminar airflow and it becomes turbulent, all the rules break down, the formula doesn't hold, and the relationship is gone. Okay, but assuming we have laminar airflow against an airfoil, the shape of that airfoil can make a big difference in terms of what happens. Notice this airfoil here has a shape which makes the air move faster over the top than across the bottom. You can see the distance it's moving across the bottom is much less than the distance it travels over the top. But since the air molecules get there at the same time, it must be moving faster over the top. And faster moving airflow means what? It means greater dynamic pressure, less static pressure, therefore there's less pressure above and the airfoil rises. Here's a diagram that shows a constriction of airflow above the wing, increases speed, which in turn increases dynamic pressure, which in turn decreases static pressure relative to the static pressure on the bottom. Okay, because static pressure is less above the wing than below, lift there, upward force, is created. Note that lift is always perpendicular to the direction of airflow. So you see the way the air is flowing past the wing, lift is going to be perpendicular to that direction of airflow. Now, there was an airline pilot, Roger Long, who created a web page I found that really helped me understand lift better. And I put the link in the written lecture notes. And he says, quote, "Few physical principles have ever been explained as poorly as the mechanism of lift." And you can imagine when I read this, I went, that's interesting. By the time you finish reading this, he says, you'll understand the way things work, or wings work. But you'll probably have to forget just about everything you ever read before about this subject. First of all, lift has nothing to do with the curve on top of the wing. Oh my gosh, so this is just sounds very different from what I just told you. And he says anyone who's ever tried to carry a large sheet of plywood on a windy day knows that flat plates carry plenty of lift. Even a ridiculous shape like this will work. And what did he draw there? Well, we're looking right directly at a hand pointing right toward us. It's like we all did as kids, sticking our hand out the car window. Whew, we got plenty of lift out of that. And there's not a perfect airfoil going on there. So he says then what you need to do is forget about Bernoulli, at least for a while. He says basically airplanes stay airborne because the wings move air downwards. And then he says, read that again. Airplanes stay airborne because the wings move air downwards. Look at the two objects represented by the two lines in this figure. After an airfoil like the one on the left goes by, there's a lot of air molecules that end up closer to the ground than they were before the line went through. The reaction to moving the weight of this air downward is counteracted by the upward support of the airfoil. Now, an airfoil like the one on the right would have no reaction with the air. Okay, would gain no lift, would move no air molecules. In similar fashion now, if you blow up a balloon, point the neck downward and let it go, the air inside, right, will now be closer to the floor and the balloon will go the other way, upward. Wings do the same thing except they move the air by deflecting it rather than by squeezing it out in a jet. And as Roger Long emphasizes, this has more to do with Newton's law than Bernoulli's theorem. So in trying to understand lift, it's more enlightening to think about the movement of air particles relative to an undisturbed air mass before the airfoil went through it than to contemplate the flow of air over the wing. So we've seen that air is pushed forward under the wing and accelerated backward over the wing. You can see the arrows here. See the high pressure below where the air is being pushed downward and forward, and then it curls up over the wing really rapidly and back over the top of the wing where the low pressure zone is. The combination of these two movements also causes the air ahead of the wing to move upward, right? This pattern is called circulation. Oh, wait a minute, you're saying to yourself by now, I know darn well the air doesn't flow around the wing that way. It's not moving forward under the wing. Well, you're right, and there's not really a flow of air forward or backward. When we're talking about circulation, we're not talking about flow over the wing. We're looking at the brief moment of the previously motionless air particles as the wing passes by. Now, no individual particle of air makes the whole trip as shown above. What's really going on is you have to break it down something like this. The wing passes, right? And each particle of air is moved slightly as shown here. Then, whew, the wing is gone. Note that all the particles, despite being deflected upward just ahead of the wing, end up lower than their initial position. That's what generates lift. Innumerable particles in real air masses are all bumping into each other, and each is affected by the ones next to it. The whole system of motion is much like a wave in water. If you're still having trouble visualizing how the wing affects the air as it moves through it, here's an animation on his webpage that really helped me. Take a look at this. Oh, is that amazing? Take a look at this. Whoa. Follow any one dot, and you'll see that it goes down. It's moved downward as the airfoil passes through that parcel of air. So, in effect, the air still moves relatively quickly over the wing and has less time to expand and press on the upper surface than it does against the lower surface, where the air is moving relatively slowly. So Bernoulli's theorem still applies, and the static pressure against the airfoil will be less on top than below. In other words, the faster moving air over the top of the wing doesn't press down on the wing as hard as it would if the air had not been accelerated by the circulation process. Keep in mind, there's no suction going on here. The air above the wing is still pressing down on the wing. It's just not pressing as hard as the air below. Now, you can do various things to an airfoil, like add camber. See the bend in the wing from the cross section? It's sort of concave, bottom concave, top convex. This will give an even greater difference between the rates of airflow over the top and bottom. See, I'm shortening the distance across the bottom, making the distance across the top even greater. Therefore, the rate of airflow is going to be greater across the top. Therefore, lift is going to be greater. But you can't do too much of that. If you bend it too much, everything breaks down because laminar airflow goes away. Same with angle of attack. You can change the angle of attack, make it slightly greater, which is going to force more air downward, which is going to give more lift. But there are limits. There are limits. If you go beyond 10 to 15 degrees of an angle, turbulence results and pressure differences are lost. Okay, the theorem falls apart. No lift, stall, stalling, that's what you don't want to hear when you're flying the plane. Okay, the same goes with speed, as I mentioned before. If you go too fast, if the air past the streamlined airfoil is too fast, it can break down the laminar airflow and all bets are off then too. But if you can create pressure differences that are exaggerated, you can get greater lift to a point. The stalling angle can be increased somewhat, and therefore the stalling speed lowered if the addition, by adding a wing slot. In the birds, this is the alula. The alula are the feathers on the thumb. They can direct the air onto the airfoil and restore laminar airflow. So you can actually take photos, in a lab and look at this. Experiments in wind tunnels show the dorsal feathers fluttering at stall angle, but with the alula tied down. But if you cut the alula loose, then the airflow is laminar again and you get your lift back. Okay, it can be controlled independently because it's on digit number 1. So when you're coming in for a landing, you look out the window. That wing slot there is helping maintain laminar airflow and maintaining lift. Now, because we need some airflow or forward speed to maintain lift, there's always going to be a speed too slow for compensation by increasing the angle of attack, and the stalling angle will be reached. And this is the stalling speed of the object, okay? The lowest velocity at which flight is possible with a fixed wing. So you can go slower and slower and slower and slower and slower and slower, and pretty soon you're going to hit a point at which you stall and you can no longer remain airborne. That's your stalling speed. Now, stalling speed is proportional to wing loading. That means the heavier the wing loading, the heavier the bird relative to the surface area of the wing, the faster it has to go just to stay airborne. So a duck, for example, is going to have to go a lot faster to stay up in the air than would a similar sized bird with bigger wings, like a heron or something. Okay, in addition to these ways of gaining lift, flying objects have to deal with 2 classes of drag, 2 main classes. We'll just break it down into 2. And drag is resistance to flow through the air. Okay, so things that resist airflow are drag. There's 2 main kinds, profile drag and induced drag. Profile drag is due to the surface friction of the object, or in the case of birds, its body. Induced drag is drag due to compensatory airflow at the wingtip, airflow that's going in a direction other than straight back over the wing. Okay, I need to explain this. So take a look at this little wingtip here. Remember, the pressure above the wing is less than air pressure below, static pressure, right? Therefore, the air particles below the wing are going to be trying to get up into the lower pressure area on top. And then when you get out to the edge of the wing, the very tip of the wing, you get the air molecules from below trying to sneak up around to the top, and it causes a circular leaking of air from underneath the wing to the top surface. Okay, and that vortex then looks something like this off of the tips of the wings of a bird or an aircraft. Amazing. Take a look at that photo. Now, what just came out a week ago or 2 weeks ago is a study showing that birds that fly in flocks often fly in V formation. And what's happening is the birds are taking advantage of the upwash zone created by induced drag from the bird ahead of them. But in cases where birds are beating their wings, they also have to time their wing beat to make sure the downstroke occurs right in the spot that the upwash was created by the bird ahead of it, if that bird is flapping its wings. So this is a pretty cool article by Portugal and others that just came out in Nature. And I've got a link to a cool video that you can look at related to that. Now, take a look at modern airplanes. Have these little doodads at the end of the wing. Those are induced drag stoppers. So if you can prevent the air from flipping up over the end from the bottom onto the top, you're going to save a lot of fuel. And you can bet that airlines are interested in saving every penny they can. Now, what adaptations do birds have, to deal with these sources of drag? How do they minimize these sources of drag? The profile drag, the thing about birds is they have smooth surfaces. The feathers are very smooth, and they're streamlined or cigar shaped. The induced drag problem, when the wings become very, very broad, induced drag becomes a greater and greater threat. And so you can slot the wings, put slotting at the end. That apparently reduces the amount of area involved in induced drag. So large birds, you'll see, have slotting much more prominently than birds with narrow little wings that come to pointy wing tips. Now, the way you make slotting is you modify the feathers. So the feathers at the very, very, very tip of the wing, the primaries at the very front of the wing, are notched on the back side of the feather, right, in that vein. And on the leading edge of the feather, they're emarginated. So notched behind, emarginated ahead, and you put a series of feathers together, and this is what they look like then. Because of that emargination and notching, you have openings created, and therefore wings can become notched. Therefore, you can reduce induced drag. Cool photo of this vulture.